Next on the news.
They were supposed to protect the innocents who now lie in their graves.
Outrage after a report slams the way law enforcement responded to the mass shooting at an elementary school in Uvalde. Plus,
it's important that we do this.
We speak with Father Brian Graby of Old St Patricks Cathedral about how pro-abortion protesters are affecting a monthly pro-life event. And new concerns that migrants at the southern border may be coming from more than 100 different countries. Also, a look at a new documentary on a Monsignor who left a lasting legacy in the Diocese of Brooklyn. I'm Christine Persichetti. Currents News starts right now. Confusion, chaos, and a lack of effective command. That's how a preliminary report by a Texas House committee describes the response by authorities to the school shooting in Uvalde. Isabel Rosales has some new details from the report and reaction from the grieving community.
Oh, shots fired! Get inside! Go, go, go!
Chaos and confusion. The mayor of Uvalde releasing this new police body camera footage.
Shots fired inside the building!
Shedding light on those first panic moments inside Robb Elementary. Critical moments tick by and urgency fades away.
What are we doing here?
Officers don't confront the gunman, seemingly confused and delayed, thinking there are no children inside. But soon after,
Go.
in a nearby classroom, police help students and teachers escape.
Kids coming out, kids coming out, kids coming out.
Outside the classroom with the gunman, officers plead with him, seemingly unaware that children may still be inside the classroom and actively in danger.
Sir, if you can hear me, please put your firearm down, sir. We don't want anybody else hurt.
A scathing 77-page report finds systemic failures by the nearly 400 officers from various agencies who responded to Robb Elementary.
They failed to move forward in the threat of danger to secure the scene, to take care of the attacker, and to save as many kids as possible.
The report reveals an overall lackadaisical approach by law enforcement with egregious poor decision-making. Investigators didn't find any single person culpable of acting maliciously, but repeatedly noted a lack of clear command.
But at least in their final moments, to hold their hand, to comfort them, to let them know that they're there with them. But they did the total opposite of that. They stood there as people bled out.
Isabel Rosales, Currents News.
In the wake of the report being released, the San Antonio Archbishop Gustavo Garcia Siller spoke about it in his homily on Sunday, saying in part, "You are rightfully devastated and angry at the tragic disaster of May 24. The church joins you in your suffering as you join Christ together with St. Paul. Despite intense feelings of grief and indignation, God does not abandon you. He never has." It was another violent Sunday in New York City with at least 12 people shot and 2 stabbed, and it all unfolded over a 6-hour period. Police say a 13-year-old girl and her mother were hit by gunfire in the Bronx while the teen was walking her dog. And detectives say a 74-year-old woman in East New York, Brooklyn, was hit in the stomach by a stray bullet. Speaking on WBLS radio on Sunday morning, New York Mayor Eric Adams renewed his pledge to crack down on crime, saying, "We're going to turn this crime thing around. And when we do so, people are going to really see the progress we've made in other parts of the city. Crime has really taken all of the oxygen out of the room. But once we do that, they're going to see what we're doing around education, around housing, and some of the other important issues." The penalty phase of the trial for Florida high school shooter Nikolas Cruz is underway. The now 23-year-old Florida man walked into court Monday for the start of the penalty phase in his trial. He pleaded guilty late last year to murdering 17 people and hurting 17 others at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in 2018. Now a 12-person jury must help decide if he will be sentenced to life in prison or receive the death penalty.
They couldn't hear me over the sound of the gunshots. It was so incredibly loud. And that was it. We just hid under my desk, we hid in the corners, and we tried to stay as quiet as possible.
In Cruz's case, the jury must be unanimous in order to recommend capital punishment. The trial is expected to last through the end of October. During the proceeding, jurors may visit the scene of the shooting, which has been sealed off for the last 4 years. Speaking at the annual NAACP convention in Atlantic City, Vice President Kamala Harris compared the Supreme Court's decision to overturn Roe v. Wade to slavery.
We know, NAACP, that our country has a history of claiming ownership over human bodies, and today, extremist so-called leaders are criminalizing doctors and punishing women for making health care decisions for themselves.
Following the speech on Monday, Harris held a roundtable with New Jersey lawmakers and discussed ways to increase abortion access. The vice president's remarks come after House lawmakers passed 2 bills Friday that U.S. bishops believe will allow for abortions on demand. The first bill is aimed at protecting abortion access at the federal level, and the second hopes to protect the right to travel for an abortion. U.S. bishops decried the 2 measures, saying in part, offering free or low-cost abortions instead of increasing the resources women need to care for themselves and their children is not choice, but coercion and callous abandonment. Simply repeating the mantra that abortion is health care doesn't make it so. Deliberately ending the lives of defenseless and voiceless human beings is the antithesis of health care. This new bill that seeks to restore abortion rights nationwide follows the lead of the abortion capital of the country. New York has had some of the strongest abortion rights laws in the nation. The 2019 Reproductive Health Act made abortion a fundamental right in the state, removing nearly all restrictions on the procedure up until the moment of birth. But now lawmakers are going further. Earlier this month, New York approved a long-stalled proposal to enshrine abortion rights in the state constitution. Governor Hochul spoke about the amendment and her fight to protect abortion rights during a virtual White House roundtable.
As long as I'm governor, these rights will not be rolled back. But we also are prepared to serve as a destination for women who'll be looking to a place like New York and other states, of my colleagues on the call, as a safe harbor. So even before the Supreme Court decision, I knew I had to beef up our opportunities for women to come from other states. We allocated $35 million right off the bat to go to providers so they could hire more people, expand their space, and make sure that they can keep their staff safe from violence as well.
New laws were also approved that protected abortion providers and patients from out-of-state litigation. The abortion amendment, which Hochul called New York's boldest step for abortion access, must now pass the newly elected legislature next year before it can go before voters, which will likely happen in 2024. Because abortion is still legal in New York, a monthly Witness for Life event that's been going on for over 10 years at Old St Patricks Cathedral has taken on new meaning. But the Mass and procession just down the street to the very first Planned Parenthood in the U.S. used to be peaceful. The pastor of Old St Patricks Cathedral, Father Brian Graby, says that's not the case anymore. He joins us now. Hi, Father.
Hi there.
So, Father, pro-abortion protests outside your church started to get pretty aggressive after the Supreme Court draft opinion leak, and then even more so after Roe was overturned. Do you fear for your safety and that of your parishioners?
I've never felt personally threatened. The people are very aggressive, screaming in our face and so forth. But thank God, to this point, there hasn't been any physical violence to speak of. I mean, they'll push and shove us a bit, but those who from our parish who participate in this Mass and procession, they've been doing this for a very long time, and they know how things unfold. And anyone who feels uncomfortable or feels that they might not be able to maintain a peaceful presence remains in the church for Eucharistic adoration while the procession takes place.
What kind of precautions do you take, if any, during events like this and during your regular masses?
Well, we've had private security for the last few months now because what used to be just, a handful of demonstrators has grown very large. And the police have been out in force. They form a line to allow us to process. We have a permit for the procession, and so they're there to protect our legal right to walk up the block. And the police officers on the front line there, my heart goes out to them. I mean, they bear the brunt of the vitriol and aggression that the demonstrators unleash upon them.
But it's not just protests. Your church, like so many others, has been targeted by vandals. And with this increasing tension, why do you still host the Witness to Life event? You know, do you have any plans to maybe put it on hold?
No, we are not going to wave a white flag on this. We're not going to give them that victory. It's important that we do this, and it's a two-pronged event. On the one hand, there's the Mass, which is the most important. We're praying for an end to abortion, not just in law, but in hearts, that we become a culture that respects and cherishes and welcomes every human life. But also, to give that witness, to go out into the streets where we're praying the rosary peacefully, and to stand across the street from this original Planned Parenthood and ask God that, the day will come when abortion is unthinkable in this country.
You just mentioned this, and the church often talks about changing hearts and minds when it comes to abortion. But do you think that's even possible with these protesters? There seems to be so much anger. How do you get them to listen to you?
It's a tall order, for sure. These are extremely angry people who are celebrating abortions, but it's also our hope that people of goodwill on the other side of this issue, or maybe on the fence, look at this display of anger and hatred and this celebration of death, and really see where the pro-abortion stance leads, which is not a good place. And we hope that brings them around to understanding why it is that a culture of life is so important.
Well, we are praying for you and for your parishioners. Father Brian Gravy at Old St Patricks Cathedral, thanks so much for being here with us.
My pleasure.
If you want to join the faithful at Old St Pat's, their next Witness for Life event will be on August 6th at 8 a.m. That includes a mass and a prayerful procession to Planned Parenthood. There's a lot more news headed your way. Pope Francis is getting ready for a long-awaited trip to Canada, asking for prayers before his journey. Plus, it's something that hasn't been seen at the southern border. What makes the recent surge in the number of migrants crossing different? And President Biden on the defensive, what he's saying about a much criticized meeting with the Saudi Crown Prince.
There are now some big changes to the tablet website. You can get personalized access to the Catholic news you value. Sign up for free at thetablet.org.
Pope Francis is asking for prayers ahead of his penitential pilgrimage to Canada next week. Speaking to those gathered in St. Peter's Square, the Holy Father noted that on July 24th, he'll begin a 7-day trip to the country. Francis will apologize to indigenous groups for abuses inflicted by the Catholic Church at church-run schools. In April, the Pope offered an apology to indigenous leaders at the Vatican. Be sure to stay with Currents News and the tablet for full coverage of the Pope's trip to Canada. We'll bring you up-to-date information all along the Pope's journey. Speaking of journeys, there's a migrant surge at the southern U.S. border. But it's not just people from Central America and Mexico seeking a better life in the U.S. The migrants are coming from more than 100 different countries. President Biden now facing increasing pressure to slow the surge. Mass migration is landing at the U.S. doorstep. With conditions getting worse in their countries of origin, migrants are arriving in droves, relieved as they cross the border. This part of the border, U.S. authorities arrest up to 1,000 migrants daily. The influx is an alarming trend made even more difficult by the nationalities of the people crossing the border. Yuma Border Patrol Sector Chief Chris Clem described the situation as dynamic.
We were having countries from Mexico, Central America, things that we could process and take the biometric data and put them in removal proceedings and or return them back to Mexico. The countries we're receiving now, those nationalities are flying in, arriving to the border, and they're having to be processed, and there's just so many of them that it is posing a challenge to the workforce.
Authorities can turn back migrants at the southwest border back to Mexico or their home countries under a Trump-era pandemic rule known as Title 42, but it doesn't apply to everyone. That, coupled with frosty relations with countries like Venezuela and Cuba, keeps the U.S. from removing certain people, meaning they might be released while going through immigration proceedings.
We continue to evolve with technology and resources, not only for our agents, but also for the overall mission in the form of surveillance systems. And then we continue to add to the processing and the humane care and of the migrants in custody, wraparound medical services, food contracts to make sure that we've got plenty of food and to be able to take care of those in custody.
The pace of people journeying north presents a steep challenge for President Biden, and one he raised with Mexican President Andrés Manuel López Obrador last week.
One of those is migration, at historic levels throughout our hemisphere. Like us, Mexico has become a top destination of migrants.
The U.S. has looked to countries further south for help, including Costa Rica, where many migrants travel through. Meanwhile, in Yuma, Arizona, they expect in the coming days they'll reach 250,000 arrests. That's more than all of last year. After his trip to Saudi Arabia, President Biden defended his meeting with Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. The president was criticized for not focusing on the murder of journalist Jamal Khashoggi, but Biden says the topic did come up.
With respect to the murder of Khashoggi, I raised it at the top of the meeting, making it clear what I thought of it at the time and what I think of it now. And it was I was straightforward and direct in discussing it.
U.S. intelligence has concluded the Crown Prince sanctioned the murder, but he has denied any involvement. President Biden also downplayed a fist bump between the two leaders at the beginning of the meetings. In Ukraine, President Volodymyr Zelensky has just suspended the country's state security chief and top prosecutor. He cited several cases of treason in both of their departments. According to Zelensky, more than 60 former employees have been discovered working against the country in Russian-occupied areas. Meanwhile, the Ukrainian president fears complacency has taken hold of his country, saying he's struggling to convince Ukrainians to take air raid sirens seriously. Still to come on Currents News, there have been several attacks in the New York area. Details on Governor Kathy Hochul's plan to step up shark monitoring. And he's a major figure in the Diocese of Brooklyn. Next, the new documentary on Monsignor Bernard Quinn and the drive to make him a saint. Do you have a story idea or want to share a tip? Email us at newstips@desalesmedia.org or call our 24-hour number, 718-517-3122. We'll be right back. Amid several recent attacks on New York beaches, Governor Kathy Hochul is now ordering increased patrols and surveillance for sharks. State parks will increase lifeguard staffing at ocean beaches by 25%. Multiple drone and helicopter patrols will also be added to state parks. The move comes after the latest shark sighting this Sunday at Lido Beach on Long Island, where swimming had to be suspended. If you aren't going in the water, Pope Francis has a summer reading assignment for you, the Bible. During his Angelus greeting, the Holy Father commented on how difficult it is to find time to meditate nowadays. So he challenged those gathered in St. Peter's Square to start their days reading the Gospel, saying that even a short passage from the Bible can be an inspiration for the entire day. He's a Monsignor whose influence can still be felt in the Diocese of Brooklyn today. Monsignor Bernard Quinn is the subject of a new documentary coming up tonight right after Currents News. The Brooklyn-born priest was an activist before the civil rights movement, fighting for the rights of African Americans during a time when society was abandoning them. Monsignor Paul Jervis, postulator for Monsignor Quinn's sainthood cause, spoke to Michelle Powers last week about the priest and this exciting documentary.
Once I had gotten to know about the life of Monsignor Quinn as a young priest so many years ago at St. Peter Claver, I was convinced, that the world needed to know about this priest who had such a extraordinary love of the Lord for his black brethren, and not only his black brethren, but also everyone as well. Once I read his own words in which he said that he was willing to shed the last drop of his life's blood for the least of his brethren, I was just totally astounded. I said, oh my God, I said, this guy has to be a saint.
And let's talk a little bit about him. You know everything there is to know about him, but some people may not know that much. So let's get some facts. He established St. Peter Claver, which was the first church for black Catholics in Brooklyn. He also founded Little Flower Orphanage for black children, which was actually burned down by the KKK, I think 3 times.
Yes.
So life wasn't easy for Monsignor Quinn, but why do you think he was such a champion for equality?
He lamented the fact that at that particular time, you know, that the church was quiet about their civil rights, and society discriminated, you know, against African Americans openly. So he felt that as a priest, he had to take their cause.
Right, let's talk about the time when he was ministering to the diocese. We're not talking about the civil rights movement. We're talking way before then, the 1920s, 1930s, overt racism. Were there threats against his life when he said, I would drop the last blood for them? So there must have been threats against his life.
Sure, he had a head-to-head confrontation with the Klan, because the Klan, they were determined that the orphanage would not be established in Wading River, because Wading River at that particular time was considered to be off limits, you know, to blacks and African Americans. So Father Quinn courageously stood up to the Klan, and they, and after the second time they had burned down the orphanage, they made threats on his life, and he was not afraid.
And now we hope everyone will watch this documentary, but you told me you have watched it yourself. And what do you think the biggest takeaway, if someone's watching this for the first time, what do you want their biggest takeaway to be of Monsignor Quinn? And if you could change anything in the film, what would it be?
I would not change anything. I think the documentary really brings out the fact that Father Quinn was truly a champion of Negro, of African American rights. He was a priest who was madly in love with the Lord. And it was a spillover of his love for the Lord that he gave, you know, to African American. You know, his famous words that he would be willing to shed the last drop of his life's blood. But it's important people to understand. He said he was on fire, and when I read those words, I said, "Oh my God!" I said, "There's nothing can stop this priest, this man."
That was Monsignor Paul Jervis, postulator of Monsignor Bernard Quinn's sainthood cause. And stay right here. You can watch that documentary Monsignor and Michelle mentioned right here on Net TV immediately following Currents News. And it sounds fascinating. And that is Currents News. I'm Christine Persichetti. Thank you for joining us, because we are putting your faith in the news. Hope to see you again next time.